Hello everybody and welcome, it's John Pace here. I've gotten a lot of requests over the past several months to share my HDR workflow. It's really kind of problematic to do that on YouTube because if I go ahead and try to make a quick time recording of the my MacBook's display while I'm using Final Cut Pro, it will all be in SDR, not HDR, so the image will be really dark and it won't really be HDR. So until I figure a way around that, like recording the screen with a camera or something like that, which is far from ideal, I'm just going to kind of like walk through the steps here of what I do when I color correct in preparation for grading. And you can also follow along by looking at the HDR workflow on my blog or the color correction workflow. There are links for both of those in the description of the video. First of all, I'm just going to go through the dozen or so steps that I go through before I even ever turn on my LG OLED display, because I'm just checking to see if my recorder is on. Because one question I get asked a lot is, what about burn-in on an LG OLED if you're doing all this grading and stuff like that? Well, I spend most of my time doing color correction and everything on my laptop. So here's all the steps I go through. The first step, of course, is shooting the X-Rite color checker passport video, both the white target and the color chips when you're recording video. Next is in post. Most of the corrections are done just using the scopes in Final Cut Pro on my laptop, again, without even turning on the LG OLED at all. I adjust the luminance using the color wheels. I don't use the curves to adjust the brightness of the image, at least not for the basic color correction. I adjust the white balance using the black, gray, and white bars of the X-Rite color checker, along with the RGB overlay and the color curve. So again, these steps are all done just on my MacBook Pro. No need for an HDR display to do any of this. I correct colors using the color chips and hue versus hue in the hue versus saturation curves of Final Cut Pro. Next, I align the shadows in the RGB parade using the shadow color wheel. So even after we've adjusted the white balance using the black, white, and gray bars on the color checker, it's absolutely necessary in order to get good skin tones. You've got to make sure that in the RGB parade that the red, the green, and the blue line up very closely on the very bottom for the shadows in order for you to get good colors. Next, I align the skin tones on the skin tone line in the vector scope using the mid-tone color wheel. Then I boost saturation, usually to around 1.1. That's just a starting point, a suggestion. It's not like written in stone or anything. Saturation is a matter of taste, yeah? And then only then, after doing all those steps, do I go ahead and look at the LG OLED. So 99% of my color correction is just done on an ordinary SDR display. Now, I'm not suggesting that you can do your HDR grading without an HDR monitor. You can't. I really don't recommend that at all. But the preliminary steps, yes, you can do that with an SDR display like a MacBook Pro, a desktop, any desktop or an iMac or something like that. Now let's take each of those steps one by one. But first, I want to point out that for years, when exposing to the right, which is how I expose using zebras, I've always found myself having to reduce the exposure by about 1/3 of a stop after I'd calculated what the exposure should supposedly be in order to get a good image. The reason being that if I didn't do that, I'd often find out that the highlights on my model's face or something like that would be blown out and not recoverable, and I could never figure out why. And it was only the other week I was shooting a model in direct sunshine, and she was holding up the X-Rite color checker for me, and as I was trying to adjust the exposure or something. The sunshine was just too bright to see the LCD screen, so I ended up using the EVF, which I almost never use. And I turned on magnification. I don't know whether I did it intentionally or by accident, because I'm always hitting that button by mistake. But I realized then that after all these years that there are zebras in the highlights that you can't see looking at the low resolution LCD screen of the A7 III, the A7S III, and other alpha cameras with the really lousy low resolution screen. So I would be very careful when using zebras. I would really recommend using the magnification tool to check and double check and make sure that you don't have any zebra stripes in the important highlight areas of your image, because particularly in HDR, it's bad enough in SDR, but in HDR, if you have blown out highlights, it's just a total mess. There's nothing you can do. The image is just garbage. Okay, so anyway, okay, another thing I want to stress is that while there seems to be a lot of steps for the X-ray color checker and doing all this stuff, number one is after you've done this one time in, say, a project, provided that your other clips are taken under similar lighting conditions, you could just go ahead and copy and paste all of those color corrections. You can also save your color corrections as a preset in the effects panel of Final Cut Pro and go ahead and use it in later projects and so on like that. So it's not absolutely necessary that you do it every single time. There are also NLEs like Resolve, DaVinci Resolve, and there are plugins where if you shoot the X-ray color checker chart, all you do is place a grid over it in their app, and the app will automatically fix all the colors for you. Now, I haven't done that yet myself. I did place a grid on a video clip and just to see what it was doing, but I never checked to see the result of the color correction on an HDR monitor to see if it was an improvement or if it made the image worse. So I can't really recommend it, but I'm told that it works well. I'm going to skip a lot of this because this video is going to be way too long. Okay, so the important thing is you don't want to burn in your LG OLED. So do most of the corrections using the scopes, and for that you can just work on your desktop or on your laptop. Especially since when you're doing HDR, all of your clips are going to be 1,000, 2,000 nits or higher, and you don't want to be setting your pixels on your television set on fire in just a couple weeks and burning it out. The same thing goes for using color masks and shape masks. I don't want a bunch of triangles and rectangles burned into my television set. So I do all that stuff on my laptop. When you're adjusting luminance, make sure that you pull the shadows down first, then do the midtones. Try not to touch the highlight wheel if possible, because if you adjust your luminance using the highlights first, what's going to happen is, like all of my early HDR videos, they're all going to be SDR because they're all going to be like 100 nits brightness. So start off just by pulling the shadows in the midtones, and if you absolutely have to, pull down the highlights using a highlight color wheel. With the shadows, be extremely cautious about crushing them. What you want to do in HDR, I think it can be much trickier. I just pull the shadows down until the very tippity, the very edge of the shadow areas is just touching the zero on the waveform monitor. I don't want to crush the shadows, so be very careful not to crush the shadows. And then after you've adjusted the skin tones, go ahead and make a color mask. Go ahead and use the draw mask, place it over the highlight portion of the subject, and make sure that the skin isn't greater than like around 100 nits. You definitely don't want the skin to look like the light bulb. 100 is a good place, a good starting point. It's often going to be a lot less than 100, but I found that in HDR, you want the skin tones to be a little bit brighter than you would normally in SDR. Otherwise, they look really, really dark. Not that you can't have dark subjects in HDR video. It looks great. It's looking at subjects in really dark shadow. You could see everything. It's really beautiful. But I'm talking about a subject that's well lit or has light directly on their face. Make sure that it's not over 100 nits or so. What else we got here? Sorry, I'm not that prepared here. Okay, after you've done these, you'll want to take frequent breaks. You'll want to continually compare your corrected video, the color corrected video, with the original to make sure you're going in the correct direction. And then before you upload your finished video to YouTube, it can take hours for it to finish processing. So just upload like a 30-second clip of your finished project and then look at it on your television, look at it on an HDR smartphone, like I have an iPhone 12 Pro Max. Look at it in SDR on your notebook, your laptop, and see what it looks like on YouTube in the SDR version, and make sure that everything looks good before you go ahead and upload the whole project and waste all your time if the colors aren't correct. Okay, so I think I've covered almost everything there. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up. If you'd like to see more content like this in the future, please consider subscribing, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.